Get out of the way. Welcome, everyone, to this lecture by our visiting Professor of Creative Media. The Visiting Professorship of Creative Media is a revolving position. We appoint a new person to it every year, and it was set up by a very generous benefaction given by News UK almost 30 years ago. This year's Visiting Professor of Creative Media is Jeanette Winterson CBE, who really does need no introduction. I know that you will all be very familiar with a wide range of her writings, and we're absolutely thrilled to have her come and be our visiting professor at the English faculty in Oxford. I'll just mention a couple of her high points out of so many. So she studied English. She studied English here at Oxford at St Cat's, and then her work really exploded onto the literary scene with Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit in 1985. And that book was then adapted for television in 1990. Looking around the room, I can see that many of you were not born at that point. But I can also see that many of you, like me, were indeed born and were at school at that point. And in those days, at the time of Section 28, and some of you who don't know what that is, Google it afterwards, find out about it, because it is important. It was a complete revelation for people who were at school at that time to have this high-profile book, high-profile TV series that does many different things, but one of the things that it does is talk about same-sex relationships, same-sex love, in ways that were completely different to what was encountered, or what we were allowed to encounter in schools because of the laws at the time, which is the Section 28 that I just mentioned. So, I mean, it's completely seared on my memory personally, seeing it on TV at that time as a teenager. And I know that so many of us in the room will feel that our understanding of many aspects of identity were really shaped by that book and by the adaptation. Jeanette has, of course, gone on to write many more things, I think over 20 books. One of my favourite titles is the memoir, Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, which I sometimes quote to my own children when I'm trying to talk about the importance of not conforming and doing your own thing, that it's a good thing if you're doing something a bit strange. You know, why be happy when you could be normal? Particularly recently, Jeanette has been writing about AI in a couple of different ways, which is, of course, particularly interesting for this creative media field that generally frames these lecture series and these visiting professorships. Frankenstein is a really brilliantly creative book that moves between a contemporary story about AI and trans identity and the story of Mary Shelley and her creation. Jeanette has also written 12 Bytes, how we got here, where we might go next, a different way, a different genre of looking at AI. And tonight she is going to talk about the word zoo, language in the time of tabloids, TikTok, conspiracy cults, Brexit and AI. Evolution, conservation, extinction. Join me in welcoming Jeanette.
Because we couldn't get a Madonna mic, it was too futuristic. So we'll do it this way. I am so happy, Marion, that you are the new Gandalf. You have been elevated in this university to the J.R.R. Tolkien chair. It's really good. The first woman? How fab is that? I mean, no more mouldy old tweed, no more evil-smelling pipes. Here she is. And this is something to be celebrated for you, for the university, for your students, for women. Change does happen. There is such a thing as progress. And right now, we need these cheering moments, Marion, that things can change. I am delighted. And I look forward perhaps to being a foot soldier with you on whatever adventures we undertake next in order to defeat. Right. Do you know, I always hated this lecture theatre when I first was in it. It hasn't got any better. What I'm going to do is I'll stand over... I can't stand behind the lectern because I'm too short. And also, one of the things I want to tell you as you go forward in your lives as young persons is that you must not block the energy. And that's what lecterns do. They're a shield, actually. And they can be useful, but they can also be a way, like a big desk can, like a distance can, of saying, I'm the person who's doing what I'm doing and you're over there. So I learned early, perhaps because I was brought up in a gospel tent, that the best thing that you can do is not hide. Naked is the best disguise, isn't it? That you simply are, that we're in this together. I'm sorry, in some ways, this is such a formal setting, but it must be. But in fact, what we're doing here is exactly what books do. We're sharing a conversation. We're trading ideas. We're in a moment of curiosity where we'll agree, we'll disagree, but we are the same stuff, you know? You're at this point, most of you, in your lives. I'm at a different point. But we are on that continuum. And I do think that is so important that we recognize each other across generations, across ages and stages, across political views, across disciplines, that we are part of the human family. And as you know, our biggest challenge now is to save the planet. So, young people, please do that for me. Right, where do we begin? We begin here, in case you don't know. So when I was a child, and I was brought up in the north of England, there were 6 books in our house. There was the Bible, there was Cruden's Complete Concordance to the Bible, and 4 books about the apocalypse, which was Mrs. Winterson's preferred study area. She said, the trouble with a book is that you never know what's in it till it's too late. This warning was predicated on a profound understanding of the power of words. Now, we were Pentecostals, and that's a movement whose primary text is found in the New Testament, the Acts of the Apostles. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place, and suddenly there came a sound from heaven of a mighty rushing wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like of fire, and it sat upon each of them, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men, out of every nation under heaven. Now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because every man heard them speak in his own language. And they were all amazed, and they marveled, saying to one another, Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? And how hear we every man in his own tongue? Now, the bit that mattered to me was that everyone heard what was being said in their own language. It's what we mean when we say, this speaks to me. And being the kind of kid who was day by day saving herself through books, I recognise this as my personal experience. I wasn't an adopted runt from Manchester. I was Hotspur. I was a Hobbit. Cathy, Heathcliff, Lancelot du Lac, Emma Woodhouse, Moomintroll, Huck Finn, Hermione in The Winter's Tale, as she rounds on that psycho Leontes. My life stands in the level of your dreams. Every day when I woke up to Mrs. Winterson, I knew that phrase. The lived experience of those characters, okay, those fictional characters, was not my lived experience. I was packing up jumpers on a market stall after school, and my mother kept a service revolver from the war in the duster drawer. I didn't need to read my story, which felt to me like a fiction anyway. I wanted to know how to change the story. And that's what language offers. Language I could see. How could I not see? It was right there on the page. Language itself is where the power is kept. It was not so much the content of the story. And this was a long time before honest-to-God writers were shipped to that part of the word zoo for content creators. No, the power of fiction, the fiction that I was reading, it wasn't derived from its faithful reproduction of lived experience, its verisimilitude. Not even when it was one of those 19th century novels zooed up as social realism. Straight past the penguins and you'll find social realism. I object to labels because they limit us. And the thing to know is that literature is not a piece of tracing paper laid over the details of life. It's an energetic reconstruction. It zooms in. It zones out. It races for the close-up. It ignores the background. It adjusts the volume. It retongues ordinary speech via its instinct for the profound truth that words are the part of silence that can be spoken. Now, I believe that humans invented language because our inner condition is one of silence. We cross vast plains of the unknown, and though we may travel in groups or with someone we love, and though we tell stories round the fire at night, it is just before dawn, between the last star and sunrise, that we know ourselves to be alone. And out of this knowing, we speak. Out of this knowing, we write. Out of this knowing, we create. Of course, language does all the fetching and carrying too. Words are pack horses. Words are quantum basics, the minimum amount of physical property involved in an interaction. Have you fed the dog? Who is the Prime Minister this week? But words, even at their simplest, shall we take an unassuming noun, say lettuce? Even words at their simplest can assume unexpected associations. It will take some time before the nation's salad bowls are quite what they used to be. Words will undertake whatever menial task is required. And those same words are to be found in the best writing, whether fiction or non-fiction, whether on the page or on the stage. Specialist disciplines do require particular vocabulary and phraseology, and we need language specific to those disciplines. Nevertheless, your language, my language, language, the original multitasker, does it all. I tell my students, I say to the kids I speak to in schools, trust language. There is no need to strain it, no need to embellish it. Find the words that find the thought, that find the feeling. And you needn't worry about meaning. Meaning is an emergent property. As a young woman, I recognized that language, the language I found in literature, had the power to communicate. It had the power to surprise, the power to bring about change. Now, this was not utility language, the simple necessity of everyday instruction and conversational barter. But neither was it a dialect of exclusion. It was a heightened language. Often it was a very different language to my own. But I realised it could become my own. All I had to do was keep reading. As a working class woman, at that time a double difficulty in hierarchical, class-ridden, gender-obsessed Britain, I was alive to the many dialects of exclusion, spoken and written. When I first came to this university, I was told by my tutor, thankfully dead, if they don't speak ill of the dead, why not? I was told by my tutor in his measured drawl that I was the working class experiment. And I wondered if I was going to be locked in an operant chair, where I had to decipher pages of Ulysses to get a food reward. It's why I rage against academic jargon. Policy wonk gibberish, institutional pomposity, the dead zone of officialese. Pick up any leaflet from the Department of Work and Pensions. Due to the automated nature of our systems, notifications will be processed without agent input. Try understanding that if English is a language new to you. All it means is, computer says no. And then there's the customer service reps who spend the day facilitating issues, raising an incident, and channeling back to my manager, like they're either digging a ditch or taking a course in psychic mediumship. Politician speak with its red lines, its blue sky thinking, its fondness for the back burner, its enthusiasm for the front foot. And at the end of the day, tomorrow is a long time in politics. Corporate speak, leveraging low-hanging fruit while running ideas up the flagpole at the same time as identifying bad actors, reaching out, finding a roadmap, touching base offline, giving 200%, insourcing, outsourcing, co-sourcing, energizing your base, which might be a yoga move. Circling back, rolling out, all at the same time as pivoting. Meanwhile, cite me into the thread. Let's break open optimization strategies, chase that moonshot, totalize the returns, maximize real-time delivery to stakeholders, which makes me think of Uber Eats delivering French fries to go with the sirloin. And I wouldn't like to miss the lexicon of empowerment gurus when, everywhere in this global village, at this moment in time, where is the moment if not in time? But whose clock is it anyway? Your journey has begun. Find your inner child. Resist the writing reflex. I think that means don't judge yourself. But if you don't, someone else will. Normalize your narrative. I have no idea what that means. I need a glass of water before this. Disambiguation. I hate that word. You may also disambiguate, and you can be caught disambiguating on your own or with others. I am assured that apostrophes disambiguate, but like Gertrude Stein, I look away from the private life of punctuation. Ambiguity is an excellent word. So is unambiguous. Torturing well-made words seems to function as sadistic recreation for those who would rather defenestrate language than bother to clean their own windows. The English language, well used, simply used, is a model of clarity. It will do whatever you ask it to do. There's no need to resort to fashionable barbarisms. Its Anglo-Saxon lends it directness, brute force, fierce aim, robust vocabulary. We know that before 1066 and all that, English was not a single unified language, but a series of dialects. And we know that after the Norman conquest, French influence on English was huge. At least a third of English words in use now are imported from France. Why didn't we talk about that before Brexit? Language doesn't care about borders. Language travels with people. Even if you have to leave everything behind, you don't leave your language behind. And even if you are the conqueror, even if you impose your language on the legal system, on the church, on the military, on government, people will start talking to each other, just as they always do. And languages begin to merge, to unite, literally, to have a chat. Anyone who has trudged their way through Anglo-Saxon, its saints, their body parts, its moaning wanderers and miserable seafarers, has finally dispatched the monster Grendel and his slippery mother, is thrilled when the French invade, and true to form, set about tackling the awfulness of English cooking. So many everyday words start here as the grumpy English farmers resentfully rear the meat for their snooty French overlords. So it's cow versus beef or bœuf, and sheep or mouton leave the pasture to slam down on the plate as mutton. Poulet becomes poultry, and pork with a C gets a K. But sadly, good old English swine has taken the Orwellian route, and with its thick body, short legs and greedy snout, is now mainly used to refer to well-lauded bankers and pink-faced politicians. But even our lately returned greased piglet hasn't been able to save his bacon. That phrase, saving your bacon, which really means saving your skin, is baffling to someone learning English, as baffling as sowing your wild oats. The closest most of us get to oats is in our morning porridge. And bacon is plentiful and it comes in packets. Who lives high on the hog these days? But the hog gives us a clue that this is American English, much in the same way as pork barrel politics. Listening to congressmen ramble on about how it's all pork is as baffling to British ears as Americans find the notion of donkey's ears, spanners in the works, and pulling the plug. Do you understand? But pulling the plug has nothing to do with letting the baby out with the bathwater. The British have always been sadists when it comes to children. We invented the boarding school. Now, this plug business nods at the early industrial revolution when rioting workers pulled the plugs out of the factory boilers, thus ensuring that the steam-powered looms were useless. If you look up this phrase, you get all kinds of guesses, mostly to do with electrical plugs or whipping out someone's life support. I told you the English were sadists. But I say go back to the Luddites. So many of our turns of phrase belong to an era now vanished forever. We're not getting back in the saddle or soldiering on or champing at the bit or reining in or burning the candle at both ends or walking the second mile. And judging from the obesity epidemic, we're not walking the first mile either. Is it all cross to bear? Are your hands tied? Clichés, thank you, Franz, are figures of speech that have had their day. They are as ridiculous as Jacob Rees-Mogg. Language is alive. Unlike all living things, it evolves, and that is to be celebrated. A language dies when a new generation ceases to speak it or prefers to speak something else, and they don't bother to teach the language of their parents to their children. And we know this is much more than alternative words for love or home. It's a way of life. It's tradition. It's culture. The Boorish, why can't they all speak English? Forgets or never knew what it means to arrive with a small suitcase and your mother tongue. English is the most spoken language in the world. And yes, that's empire. And yes, that's the dominance of American English. But it's also the language itself. English is a language with flex. Angles, Saxons, Jutes are in there. A bit of British Latin from all those Romans trying to find a plumber to get their central heating to work. When the French invaded, we soaked it up. We kept the knobbly bits of Norse. And by the time we got to Middle English, here's Chaucer. And he's not going to write in French, even though it's what the posh boys do. He's going to write in the London dialect. But he's not trying to fix English. He's expanding it. And he's making up words as he goes along. Twitter is one of his. Soon after, here comes Mallory's Le Mort d'Arthur. Sounds French, but it's written in English. And this time closer to early modern English, because the language is moving so fast. Chaucer invents Twitter. He just has to wait a long time for the tech bros to catch up. And Mallory shafts the French by delivering the English Uber legend, King Arthur and the Holy Grail, just waiting to be returned as the Da Vinci Code. In the meantime, English speeds forward smack into the great vowel shift, where for about 300 years nobody knows how to pronounce anything. Long vowels were in trouble because they were a bit continental, and obviously that couldn't last. And if you go to Scotland now, your breakfast host might ask, "Are you up and about?" But you're not about, you're about. And that's a bit of vowel shift. In English, spelling and pronunciation parted ways, not always, but often. And it's why someone really posh, like the late Queen, pronounced family as family and nation as nation. The A has moved to an E in pronunciation, but not in spelling. And on it went. But hey, Shakespeare coped just fine, and he threw words into the language, just as Chaucer had done. When his imagination chaffed at the limits of language, he broke out and created the words he needed. And he did what young people do all the time, which older people find really annoying. And he turned nouns into verbs. Elbow was a noun. Shakespeare wanted a verb, elbowed. And he does some horribly modern stunts too. In Hamlet, he says, "This out Herod's Herod." And as you like it, he employs co-mates, my friends and co-mates. He wasn't always a genius, you know. But mostly he was. The word fixture first appears in The Merry Wives of Windsor, and it's been a fixture ever since. Now, the thing about the language of Shakespeare is that it's the language of the King James Bible, 1611. And you heard some of that at the beginning of this talk. And I was brought up on it, read to me out loud, morning and evening by Mrs. Winterson. And when we got to the end, her favourite, the Book of Revelations, where it's all over and out, and the earth has been rolled up like a scroll, which is a pretty good image for way back then, when nobody had any idea about the science of folded-up universes. Anyway, once we got there, we had a week off to consider our position. And then we started again. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, no child that I knew growing up, and no working man I knew, and I use the word specifically, had any trouble with the language of Shakespeare, because, religious or not, people still went to church, and at church they heard the King James Bible. Do good intentions, and the road to hell is paved with them, to bring the language of the Bible up to date. And you think, dude, the Bible's not about being up to date. Surely now, when we look at the evangelical right in America, we know that. For many, the Bible is an operating system, but it's one without a software update. Anyway, what really happened, trying to update the King James, was that 400 years of connection to the English language was wiped out for anyone who didn't have a decent education. Does it matter? Kids in state schools are taught Shakespeare now in up-to-date editions. And what is the point of that? By all means, tell the stories. I read the Bible stories, the stories of Shakespeare, just like I read the Greek myths and the fairy tales, and that's great. But those are the stories, the content. It's not enough. The language itself, that's the resource. Listen, I love a cover version. I've written a few of them, and some of the best songs are cover versions. But don't strip the language. Remake the content. That's creative. So Romeo and Juliet becomes West Side Story. It even becomes Warm Bodies, you know, the zombie movie, about an affair between Juliet Human and R, the zombie. Shakespeare has survived Romeo and Juliet. Nobody dies, and the gnome characters now have a spin-off of their own. And the geeks' go-to myth, Pygmalion, becomes the stage play, Pygmalion, becomes the musical, My Fair Lady, becomes Pretty Woman. What we do is to go on inventing. Okay, back to the great vowel shift. Now, it's such a silly phrase, I love it. This extended Tower of Babel moment for the English language lasted about 300 years, and it caused all kinds of existential crises. There was the usual stuff. English had had a golden age, and now it's a mouthful of tin tacks. Nobody will be able to read the literature of the past because the language of the present can't stand still for 5 minutes. Reasonable worry. Nobody can spell. Well, there was no standardised spelling. My grammar is better than your grammar. Tisn't, tis, tisn't, tis. And other Monty Python-style fisticuffs. So eventually, and we're in the 1700s now, a group of booksellers got together to commission Dr. Johnson, critic, word hoarder, linguist, lexicographer, pedant and bookhound, to compile a dictionary. Really, this was so that the English could agree on spelling, meaning, usage, and then everyone could just shut the fuck up. In an astounding 8 short years, and with 6 helpers, Johnson's dictionary listed 40,000 words with references. In his preface, Johnson tells us that he finds the English language to be copious without order and energetic without rules. Yes! It's 1755 and it's out. And it's a world first. The French lexicographers are still toiling away across the channel with their quizzes. All 50 of them for 40 years. The English found this funny. The French did not. I love dictionaries. A dictionary is a book of spells. A word is much more than its meaning, more than its changing meanings. In a full-size dictionary, the scale of language becomes apparent. It is impossible to gauge this scale simply by looking up the odd word or going online to find a meaning or using a handy compact dictionary. What is astonishing is humans did this. Humans do this. This insatiable fascination with language. Now, Noah Webster's American Dictionary, first published in 1828, was the first serious work to differentiate American English, particularly in spelling, because Webster thought English was cluttered with too many leftovers, madnesses like plough and cough refusing to rhyme, and all that Frenchified spelling, like the O-U-R in colour, or the letter reversals, such as centre. But we should remember that Shakespeare's First Folio uses American spelling for both colour and centre, precisely because people did as they liked when it came to language. Gotten used to be the past tense of the verb to get until the 1600s, and it remains a past participle in American English, maybe because the Puritans took it with them when they sailed off in a huff. Anyway, you can use it in Scrabble. Now, of course, American English has entered the language everywhere. Dingy British flats are glamorous New York apartments. Folks go out in a sweater to the movies and eat cookies. Students are forced into semesters. Not here, I'm glad to say. And everything is awesome. There are around 7,000 languages in the world today, but 23 of those languages serve more than half of the world's population. English, as we know, is top dog. And then it's Mandarin, then Hindi on about 600 million, Spanish 500 million, and about half that for the French. Serves them right, because they did the purity police, didn't they, and tried to fix it. Anyway, language travels light. And that's why it travels well. For all the weight of all the books in all the world, language is made out of air. It is breath, sound waves, rhythm, tone, music, words begin in the mouth before they hit the page. We speak before we can read. This spoken language is quick, responsive, idiomatic. And spoken language changes generationally. And that speed of change has accelerated, first with radio and TV, and now with social media. Idiomatic language is moving so fast that it's no longer generational, but sweeps across the country in rain bands. As soon as young people's slang hits the mainstream, it's over. Just as you get used to crashy, crunk, hangry, thirsty, no, she doesn't need water, she just wants attention, or she's a noob. Then we're into low-key cute, or savage, meaning bold. And then there's Amorite, which sounds to me like a quartz mineral or a religious sect. In fact, it just means, am I right? No reply necessary. I'm glad that It's So Mid has made a comeback. It's an abbreviation for mediocre that has somehow got mangled in pronunciation with middling, I guess. Short King is trending again. Rishi will be glad. Just in case you don't know, that's for short men who have overcome their height disadvantage, unlike manlets who compensate by bodybuilding or driving silly cars. There's always been street argot, which is really micro-dialect, so that you can identify where you're from and your allegiances. Not so much geographically now, but generationally. Language has always been used as a signifier of social status, and it is still, though that status no longer depends on either received pronunciation or poshness. Generational argot is ruthlessly used to brand and stigmatize those who don't belong, or to badge as to an identity, whatever social media influencer is your guru. RP English is no longer the language of power, although too many in power still speak it, because that's their background. The most distressing thing about populism is how the privileged and the wealthy have repositioned themselves as we the people. In fact, they are the elites. But that word is moving meaning, and at present includes anyone who is not a neoliberal. On TikTok, it's used to define not a particular group, but something or someone that's the best. Kanye West, or Ye, whatever he's called now, likes that word. Now, my time here tonight is funded by Rupert Murdoch, the Australian disruptor who just won't die. I didn't get divorced at 91. Murdoch set out to disrupt print journalism in the UK, and he bought the broadsheet, the Sun newspaper, in 1969, and he turned it into a tabloid. That strange word seems to come from the 19th century pharmaceutical industry, a compound of tablet and alkaloid, used for a patented, highly condensed medicine, like aspirin, a short-form drug, which pretty well sums up Murdoch media. The point was never to be news. The tabloid was based on the scandal sheets popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, a mix of lurid stories, crime and gossip being the staple fare. And Murdoch, ever the showman, added sport, astrology, popular columnists, and of course a TV guide, soon with reviews. And then there were the page 3 girls. Aimed at the working class market, the style is short, simple, punchy, lots of pics and graphics, an entertainment newspaper, sensationalist journalism, and celebrity stories paid off. Viciously right-wing. The Sun, like the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, intends to influence politics, all under the rubric of sell it to the man and woman in the street, and it works. Moving his media empire into TV, Murdoch's news outlets have never deviated from the winning formula of the sizzling, soar-away sun. Truth no longer matters. Facts no longer matter. Trump's endless cry of fake news was never directed at the Murdoch empire. In the UK, we know, because the Home Secretary has told us, that it's the tofu-eating, woke, Guardian-reading, literati elites who are responsible for the downfall of everything. The internet is a dream come true for the far right. No fact-checking, no accountability, the most lurid madnesses garnering millions of hits, the amorality of Facebook and its clickbait algorithms, QAnon, Steve Bannon, the black magicians at Breitbart, the dark money think tanks, a man called Boorish, a guy called Donald. And when the lies are uncovered, as with Alex Jones at InfoWars, you know, the big mouth who claimed the Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax, well, no one's shaken, no one begins to question, no one repents. And that's the right word, because it contains in it reflection, acknowledgement, and crucially, behaviour that changes. Apologies are easy, but will you repent? All that changes is that the aggressors double down and play the victim. Victims of the tofu munchers who spoil the party with a few facts. The genius of tabloid journalism is that it no longer needs the tabloids. Its formula is the success story. The medium isn't the message. Forget that. The message has learned how to control the medium. And the secret sauce in this formula milk is what the internet and social media do best of all: distract. The human brain is wired to notice noise, sudden movement, bright colours, violence, sex. It's how we evolved. If you were so wrapped up in the mysteries of the universe that you didn't notice the saber-toothed tiger, no more mystery for you. We're primed to look around us. And the advertising industry hooked into that big time in the 1960s. Get someone's attention and you can sell them stuff. You all know that when you're online, trying to read something serious, complex, when you really don't want to be distracted, up pops some crap in the sidebar about cashmere crop tops. Victoria Beckham's feud with Nicola Peltz. The Sun's headline today is Rish Bash Bosh. How Rishi wiped the floor with Keir Starmer at PMQs. And at the bottom of the front page, there's a gay man on a camel with the strapline. I wish I hadn't used that word. Anyway, there's a gay man on a camel with the strapline, no humping. England fans told to steer clear of blah, blah, blah. Look, of course it's funny. British humour is pantomime humour. We've never been subtle. But we love wordplay. And the tabloids are supreme at wordplay. Lettuce Liz on leaf support. But, and this does matter, life is serious, never more so. Life is complex. We need real debate, considered arguments, the capacity to concentrate. Above all, the capacity to concentrate. Students, none here, I know, who replay lectures on triple speed while checking their phone and watching TikTok are not training their minds. And if those young people have mental health issues, they're making those mental health issues worse. Deep reading, deep listening, deep concentration. These things work as meditation. You lose yourself. You come out of clock time, itself a devising of the machine age, and you enter significant time. Look, we all glance at the headlines, we take in a rush of information, we all multitask, and that's fine, we're busy people in a busy world. But the weapons of mass distraction turned on the people of the world, the trivialization of everything. What does that do? It makes you paranoid. It makes you superficial. It turns off impulse control, which means you buy stuff you don't want. And you act in ways that lack both rationality and emotional intelligence. We need to step out of the doom loop. And the good news is that while language can be manipulated to break us as individuals and to break us as a nation, the Brexit lie, language really is where you can take back control. Language But language, like everything worthwhile, needs time. Human beings are primed for language, just as we are primed for love. But you can't do either of those things by yourself. Kids who don't hear language don't learn language. Kids who are not loved will struggle with love for the rest of their lives. Before they can speak, kids listen. And the more language they absorb, the greater their capacity when they do speak. And on it goes. If you have only a small word base, there's not much you can say, not much you can understand. And we know what it's like in a foreign country where we can order food and ask directions, but conversation is limited. And we find that when we try to have a conversation, our thoughts have to shrink to match the language available. Imagine if that state was a permanent state. Now, the far right that wants to take over the world dislikes education for the masses, unless it's applied science or tech. The assault on the humanities that is gaining momentum is an assault on learning how to think for yourself, learning how to express yourself, moving outside your own time into other times, managing complexity, difficulty. Literature isn't cancel culture. Literature says, bring it on. Literature is a history of the human, the total human, the human in love as well as in the lab, the human oppressed by the system, the ordinary human. And that's what the 19th century novel does so well. It takes the little guy out of the fairy tales, you know, the third son who eventually kills the dragon and gets the princess. Takes the little guy out and puts him, her, centre stage. But as we discuss, what's called social realism is so much more. It's not a documentary. It's not even a docudrama. It's the life of the soul. Now, the alt-right isn't interested in your soul, except as a Faustian snatch. Have a bigger TV and more junk food. Spend all day on your phone. Just keep us in power. But when they've wrecked the economy and the climate and the planet and retreated to their Wi-Fi-enabled Noah's Arks in New Zealand, there won't be any distractions. Then you'll know that distractions were the distraction. The reluctance towards mass literacy in the past, because it's a recent human right and by no means spread across the globe, that reluctance was and is a reluctance to share knowledge and, of course, information. But now we've discovered that sharing information, let's call it something old-fashioned like truth and facts, that sharing those things is not required. Awkward truths, awkward facts, deny them. Climate change, the American election results, or make stuff up. Keep literacy at a low level, tabloid level. Supplant it with talking and moving media. Don't censor things because then folks get curious. Just make sure they'll never read it anyway. Studying English, our literature and language, is at the moment being peddled as a waste of time or as an indulgence or as a soft option. And I do believe that universities need to reassess their degree courses. But I also believe that anyone studying physics or maths or computing science should take literature modules. I don't mean make them read Beowulf or that other wolf, Virginia. We could do Philip K. Dick, Ray Bradbury, Ursula K. Le Guin. Literature is a metaverse. It's a virtual world. Jump in, find your avatar. We knew what mine were. Hotspur, Cathy and Heathcliff both. You see, literature doesn't ask you to stick with the binary. You can switch about when you're in there. You can be who you want, a boy or a girl. Just like in Shakespeare, you know, it's a girl or it's a boy, who's a boy, who's a girl. Or you can even be a creature with a snout who's dating the snort maiden. The metaverse of literature can land you anywhere. You might find a map. Where'd you go from here? Or the text might act as an unmapping, a demolition of where you thought you lived, a border crossing to another country. Or the recognition with such relief, well, Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. Getting out of Kansas is good for your mental health. There is no CCTV in your imagination. There is no data trail. It is the last redoubt. Your only private space. And that's why the real elites, the shadowy manipulators, don't want you to have any imagination. Back in the 1920s, the dismal pseudoscience of behaviorism set out to prove that behavior can be manipulated, nudged, that outcomes can be predicted with accuracy. It is so. Yet I believe that literature is a protective lining against manipulation. Through reading, you develop your own language skills and therefore your thinking skills. But literature is about the heart, too. To be a total human, you need more than a good mind. You need a good heart. Actions have consequences. Decisions have consequences, sometimes for many millions of people. PPE in this university has a lot to answer for. Could we not turn the E into English? In my view, it's the way we teach economics that needs an urgent overhaul, not the matter of whether we teach English. Don't apologise for what you love. If you love books, if you love language, never apologise, but always explain. Language, in the most solipsistic way, explains us to ourselves. And young people, above all, need to try on so many different selves, play with so many different ideas, put yourselves into words. And that's what language gave me as a young person. Certainly I learned how to tell a story, including my own story, but more importantly, I learned connection with other minds, dead and alive. Death is no barrier to communication. Other ways of talking, other experiences. But there was a vital thing in common, a thing that we invented, that we keep reinventing, language. And it's how it starts. In the beginning was the word. Thank you.